Welcome everyone to this, our July monthly talk, where we are delighted to host Barney Angliss, and the title of his talk tonight is Breaking My Silence, How I Came to Advocate for Myself. If this is the first time that you have been to one of our Wellbeing Hub talks, just to give you a little outline of what we do each month, pretty much a similar format each month. We start off with an introduction to the Wellbeing Hub team, just so that you know who we are. I do a little bit of housekeeping about what to expect, and then tell you a little bit about the Wellbeing Hub, and then hand over to our speaker, who I say this evening is Barney. Barney's going to talk for about 45 minutes or thereabouts, which will leave us about half an hour for questions at the end. And the talk will end promptly at 8:30 or slightly before tonight, because we've got a smaller group. In terms of the Wellbeing Hub team, I'm Jo Billington, but I'm joined tonight by the other members of the Wellbeing Hub who will be popping up on the screen and just giving you a wave. We've got Fiona Knott, who's our clinical director, and we've got Emma Harris, who is one of our clinical psychologists, and we also have Hazel McCarroll, who is our support administrator, who many of you will have had contact with if you've signed up for our newsletter or contacted us for any reason. But if you do want to reach out to any of us, the email address to do that on is autism@reading.ac.uk. In terms of the admin around tonight's talk, Barney has very kindly agreed for us to be able to record tonight's talk, and the recording of the talk will be emailed to everyone who's registered for tonight within the next 2 weeks. Barney's also very happy to answer questions. If you could submit those via the Q&A feature on your screen, so it's the icon that's just displayed on this slide now. Feel free to use the chat to have conversations, to share ideas, to comment on the things that Barney is talking about. Excuse me. But if you have a direct question for Barney, if you put it in the Q&A, what I will then do is I will collate all of those questions and pose as many of them as I possibly can to Barney at the end. Because we're never quite sure how many questions we're going to get and how much time we're going to have, it may be that it's not possible to get to your specific question. And if that's the case, I apologise in advance. But as I say, we are a smaller group this evening. I wonder why. Maybe there's some other big thing happening today. But yes, I will do my very best to answer, to pose as many of those questions to Barney as possible. In terms of the Wellbeing Hub, if this is the first time, excuse me, if this is the first time you've attended a Wellbeing Hub talk, then extra special welcome to you. The Wellbeing Hub was set up last November, and really it came from conversations that we've been having as a team for many years around the idea that we seem to know a lot about autistic distress and mental ill health, particularly from a research perspective. A lot of the research is really focused on the kinds of things that autistic people find difficult. What we know much less about are the things that autistic people say help them to thrive and flourish in life. And there's lots of problems with this. One, of course, is that everybody needs to kind of have access to that information about how to lead a healthy and flourishing life. And it's not right that we don't have a detailed account of that for autistic people in the literature. But also it trickles into kind of practice as well, because a lot of what the support that's available for autistic people when they are experiencing distress tends to be related to research that's based on what not autistic people say. And we know that some of that might not quite work, might not quite fit with the needs of autistic people. So there's lots of kind of practical implications for that lack of understanding. So we aim to bring some curiosity to this idea of what is autistic thriving and flourishing. And we aim to do that by placing autistic voices and autistic people at the heart of everything that we do, in the hope that we can create some meaningful solutions and to try to support autistic children and young people, particularly, to lead their best lives. And how are we doing that? Well, within our first year, we've set up this series of monthly talks on the theme of autistic thriving and flourishing, and that is always delivered by an autistic person or an ally. We also run a termly in-person special interest group for professionals who work with autistic people in order to support neurodiversity affirming practice. We run a range of different activities and programs for schools and families. And we're also developing a program of direct work with autistic young people aimed at exploring their autonomy and agency and authenticity. Supporting all of this are our placement students. I can see that we have at least one of our placement students in the audience tonight, which is lovely to see. And these are students who are on our master's programme, Theory and Practice in Clinical Psychology, and they do their placement with us. And everything we do informs their experience while they're here with us. And also everything that we're doing, we're trying to document so that we can make a meaningful contribution to the research literature. If you want to know more about what we're doing, because it's constantly evolving, we're constantly developing, we're a brand new project, so everything is kind of in a state of development at the moment. So if you want to find out what we're doing, you want to contribute to that, then please do sign up for our newsletter. Again, the email address is autism@reading.ac.uk. And also just a quick plug for our next talk. We don't have a talk in August because of the summer break, but our next talk on the 7th of September, same time, 7 till 8:30 p.m, again on Teams, is from Dr. Brian Irvine, who's at the Centre for Research in Autism and Education at UCL. And he's going to be talking about mentoring as reframing, specialist autism mentoring at university. And just while we're on the subject of talks, and I appreciate I've talked a lot tonight already, and I will stop in a minute. All of our previous talks, well, not all of them, but those that we have permission from the speaker to record, are published on our new YouTube channel. And Barney's talk will be available there as well once we've done a little bit of editing. So again, within the next couple of weeks. And I will put a link to that in the chat when I've finished talking, so you can go to that as well. But tonight is all about Barney. So Barney is a consultant and trainer in education. He's now retired from classroom teaching, but he still works with children, teenagers and adults on a variety of challenges that they might face. He's also interested in self-advocacy, and he became so about 10 years ago, sometime later being diagnosed as autistic. But he's already had a lifetime's experience of healthcare for physical and mental health needs from childhood onwards. And he's motivated by doing things not before experienced and using intuition to find belonging. So it's my great pleasure to hand over to you now, Barney. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo, and thank you to Hazel and all the team. And thank you to everyone for joining. I hope it's going to be interesting. And to make it more interesting, you are very welcome to put questions in the Q&A or comments in the chat. And as Jo said, she's going to collate the questions. But actually, I've always found when I do talks that I like to be interrupted, partly because I know that sometimes I say things which are not immediately transparent or lack context maybe, and I like to know that people feel able to say, what the hell are you talking about? But also just because it kind of nudges me forwards, and I think that's a good thing in life just as much as in talks. So I'm going to just tell you enough about myself now and about how my early life was, just enough for you to be able to interpret some things that I'll talk about more clearly. So as Jo said, I don't teach now in a classroom, but I do teach individually, children and teenagers and young adults. But I did that for 20 years. And In between, I did jobs for local authorities in special needs. And then when I quit the classroom, which I will talk about later, um, I became like a student again. I mooched around and tried to look busy, um, and just got interested in stuff again. And over the last probably 6 or 7 years, I've spent more time working with people as individuals, um, rather than as my contacts in organizations, and working with individuals in a mentoring role. Really, I was interested in the talk that Joe uh, advertised just now that's coming up, with Brian from UCL, who's going to talk about mentoring as reframing. And at the moment, I do a lot of work with people who want that, um, most of whom are autistic, or they are carers for autistic people, um, and many of whom have got stuck, um, or isolated, or lost, or gone down a rabbit hole, or got locked into an adversarial process with a council or with a court. Um, and what I find is that people are directed towards me to help them with that process, but actually the process becomes almost a side issue. And what I help them with is to see themselves differently based on how I learned to do that for myself. And yes, it's a constant journey of understanding oneself, partly through language and partly through history. And I'm going to talk about both of those quite a bit today, especially about language. And so to do that, I'm going to go back to my early childhood. I I wasn't diagnosed with autism in childhood. My childhood was in the 1960s, and I wasn't diagnosed until I was 49. But as a small child, I was quite ill, regularly ill. I was tiny. I mean, really, really tiny. Um, Very anxious child. Um, I wasn't toilet trained until late, by even by today's standards, um, and went to school. I loved the early bit of school, but I was often unwell, um, and it's often occurred to me that perhaps feeling unwell was a reaction to school rather than the reason why I couldn't go to school, even though I wanted to. So, perhaps I experienced a long time ago what we talk about so much these days. My parents are not around for me to ask about those days, but what I remember is that spelling came almost naturally to me, almost immediate. Once I was in um, a kindergarten class, as they used to call it. Um, Reading a little bit slower, and writing. I'm 63 now, and I still can't write properly. Um, and that's always been embarrassing for me. My writing is horrendous. I went to school, but my friends went from um, infant school. They moved up ahead of me. I was kept back. I wasn't considered well enough or mature enough, big enough to stand up for myself. I couldn't do numbers at all. And so at the age of 6, my parents decided to keep me back from middle school, which is a thing that's almost disappeared off the landscape now. Um, but something odd happened in the year when when my friends were about to say goodbye. And I've never known whether this was deliberate or coincidence. I wrote the school play, so I was 6 years old. I wrote the school play. I didn't actually write it. I dictated it to my mum, who typed it, page after page of script, and took it to the nuns who ran the school and said, he wants to do the school play. So I ended up directing it. So I was 6 years old on the school stage, telling a bunch of 6-year-olds and 5-year-olds where we were, which line they'd missed, which side they should have come on, um, and what kind of person they were supposed to be. And I was 6, and I was, invisible from a few yards away. Just this big sort of barrel-like voice that I had. And I've always recognized since then that I found it possible to engage with people in the school using a script, but I had to write my own. And then I became a sort of complete dictator. Um, but it allowed me to find a voice that I had not had. Um, and it's in a strange symbolic way. A lot of my silence was due to the fact that I had chronic asthma in the days before we had any treatment, any inhalers. I was one of the first kids to get an inhaler, and the treatment for it was so primitive that I just spent every day just wheezy and short of breath and not able to talk if I had run from one room to the other. So it was quite a quiet existence. And then suddenly I had these pages of script, and everyone needed me to tell them what to do. And I think adrenaline became my friend, and always has been. So there was that. And then I went to the next school and the next school, and again was incredibly quiet and anxious, and frequently ill and taken home. Um, and then discovered not directing but acting, and discovered that I really, really could act. And I won prizes, and I was always offered like the best part, and I adored it. And we could do any amount of rehearsal. I would always be up for another 3 hours of rehearsal, and um, got a place to study drama at uni. And then in the year after my A levels, again because of health issues, and again because I didn't have the social skills um, for anyone to feel confident I would cope. Um, I went and worked for my dad in London, in his shop, and with a few mistakes that were embarrassing, I developed a degree of confidence, and a degree of adaptability to cope with life. It was the year when we had a lot of terrorist attacks in London. So it was 1979 to 80. And the bomb squad used to drive past the shop almost every day with the sirens going. Um, and I learned to be more vigilant walking down the street, and that was kind of a beginning for me. So I went to uni at the end of that year, and on the very first day I was there, I realized I'd completely lost my confidence again about acting. Didn't want to do it at all, but had developed confidence in other ways. So I just went to the office and said, I'm not doing it. And they said, you have to do it. We've got all girls and no boys. And I said, no. I mean, that was the worst thing to say. That made my mind up for sure. So I said, no, I'm not the same person. Um, and I didn't realize then that um, not only can you change the kind of person that you are, it can happen several times in your life. And it has happened several times to me. And that's really what I want to talk about today. But that was the first big change. Um, a minor change was that when I went into sixth form, for the first time in my life, I went clothes shopping. And I don't know where the idea came from, but I just determined that I was going to buy something like other people did that looked good. And I went and bought a pair of shoes, but they weren't shoes. They were little like cowboy boots, but you know, the sort of ankle boot kind of thing. And they were gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. And I was only like 5'3" at the time, and everyone else was, 5'9" or whatever. And they lifted me by like 2 inches or something. And I felt so much better. And then lots of people said, they're great, they're really nice. People who had never spoken to me. I don't know why. I think they were being kind, but they like at the same time, that was what I needed. So I just put that away in my head as how appearance can help you. Appearance doesn't matter. You're the same person, but if you need it to, it can help you. And now when I meet people and they want me to work with them or whatever, I'm good at not judging, but I'm also good at commenting if they want me to. And I do that. Someone taught me to practice the things you want to be good at socially. Just go out and practice. Someone almost bullied me into doing that. Just kept saying, "You can do that. It's okay. It's just practice. Go out and practice." Um, and so like that was the first thing that I practiced was saying, "Oh, do you really think so?" When people said, "I like your boots," um, and I still do that now. And I share that with other people quite a bit, how you can practice. And I love now, autistic people don't normally love to do this. I love now just to time a compliment right and see what happens. And I store every tiny bit of feedback, whether it's verbal or non-verbal. I store it because someone has taught me that's what you need. That is useful. And you will say maybe, it's masking. You're just masking. It's bloody useful masking. It's very useful because while you're masking and you're not feeling totally destroyed by other people and environments, while you're doing that, you may be comfortable enough to get on with developing the self underneath. And I've really enjoyed in the last 10, 15 years, I've enjoyed nurturing the self underneath. And I don't care really if I'm masking on top of that. It's giving me a break. And for maybe 30 or 40 years, life was so fragile and anxious. I never had a break. So thanks very much. I'll take it. I never condemn people for masking. I'm just interested in their technique, and I'm interested in whether they know that they're masking. They don't necessarily need to know. It can function very well for them without them knowing. Don't need to shatter the illusion. But some people appreciate knowing. Some people welcome talk about masking and the self underneath. So I've learned to kind of just nudge the conversation until I feel I know whether they want to talk about masking or not. It's been a massive asset for me to understand that you can have the conversation, but you can also choose whether to have those conversations. So, where did I get to? I got to uni. I didn't do drama. I just did an English degree. I ended up covering for, sadly, a teacher at my old school who had passed away suddenly, lived alone, had epilepsy, and I just had to step in for a few weeks, and that became 3 years. Went and did my PGCE, went and taught in a mainstream school, and then switched again because again I was very unwell. Um, we started a family, and when my health it looked like it was going to be a long-term problem, I went to work for a local authority doing. I just thought it was an office job, and I thought it would be safe for me. And it turned out to be special needs caseworker, and that set me off on a totally different path. And from there, I went to teach visually impaired kids in a unit in a mainstream school. And then I went to work as one of the local authorities' special needs managers. Did that for 5 years. Became very cynical about the kind of decisions that they wanted to make, which I wasn't willing to make. I did my share of representing them at tribunal, which is how I learned to do the tribunal stuff that I do now. And somebody dared me to apply for the deputy headship of a pupil referral unit, and they said, you wouldn't do it, you haven't got the balls. So I filled in the form the next day and did it. And I realized almost from day one, the reason you are not afraid of these guys letting off fire extinguishers and, waving their lighters in your face and whatnot, you're not afraid because you grew up thinking you're so small nobody would hit you. And so I just carried on masking again because that was fine. I got on great with the kids. I'd had 3 years there, loved it. And I thought, well, have I done a good job? And a teaching assistant cried when I left. And I thought, I don't know why, but that's feedback. Use it all. She also said that I should not be allowed ever to use power tools with young people. That was written on my file. She was very wise. So then I went into mainstream. I took what I'd learned in PRU, went to mainstream, did 15 years as a special needs coordinator in mainstream. Loved it, but got very upset regularly with the constraints and some of the stuff that went on, some of the decisions that were made. Left after an episode I'll tell you about in a minute. Left and felt very sad and very aggrieved. And one of the things that I've met a great deal of in the last 8 years is people feeling that huge wave of anger and grief after leaving a job that they loved and being forced to leave it, feeling that their methods weren't acceptable or their values were not compatible, that they were idealistic, that people found them too challenging to work with. I've met a lot of people in that situation and a lot of people who have gone through years of heartache about not being able to complete something that they started. It was massively difficult for me. And I'll talk about what happened as a result of that in a while. But anyway, change is good. And I've had many, many changes in my life. And each of them has led me to what I consider the happiest possible life for me. And that's, you can't ask for more. So looking back at it, I developed a voice through acting. I lost it, but ended up in teaching and developed another voice. And I found that I liked teaching because even though I was massively anxious, I could control the conversation in the room. And that had always been difficult for me to do as a younger person. I never knew what to talk about. I never knew what other people expected from me. I never knew what was the appropriate thing to say. I had burnt my fingers many times saying things which I thought were smart or funny, and were not appropriate at all. And now I had the whole thing laid out for me in the classroom that if there was too much talk and I couldn't process it all, I could slow them down. If it was uncomfortably quiet, I could do something that would get them talking. I could navigate the conversation to the topic that I felt I know about this. Basically, I was choosing the topics 5 times a day, 5 days a week off my bookshelf and following the curriculum. And if it weren't for the anxiety that I used to experience at weekends, that would have been absolutely perfect. So my second voice was the teaching voice. And when it all blew up and I left, I discovered this other completely different voice that comes from much deeper inside me, which is the voice with which I talk to people who've asked me to talk with them. And now I don't ever go to a room where I haven't been asked to come and talk. And that's a weird feeling. It's a privilege. Um, but always before I was talking because everyone had been told to go in that room and I would, do my job. Now I just talk because somebody contacts me and says, would you be able to do X, Y, or Z? Just as Joe has asked me today to talk about, all of this self-advocacy. And what I found that is different is that now I will talk about stuff with people and I will focus very, very much on what they want to talk about, unless like now, like this talk, I'm being asked to talk about my own experience. But when I go and talk with other people, I'm talking 100% about it's either their child or it's about their employment or it's about their fear of traveling across London or it's about their codependent relationship with someone else, which is something that I meet quite a lot now. And I am totally focused on them and I'm just processing the responses that I get. And the things that I'm talking about this evening, I use them. And you'll see why in a minute. I use them, but I'm not there to talk about them. I use them if they become useful. I hope that makes sense. And that started because while I was still a Senko in mainstream school, and we had two children growing up. One was about, I don't know, 17, 18, and the other one 14 or 15. And I realized that I was a very angry person, quite regularly angry, and that the anger was becoming unpleasant to live with, and that at times the house could be, it could be really on a knife edge. And I would go into these moods where I couldn't talk at all. I would go silent. I would shut people down, um, and it just became really worrying to the point where I understood that the problem was with me. It was not with other people, and I had to address it. It was so unpleasant, and I'm not talking about DV or anything like that. But you can be hostile just by what you say or by saying nothing at all. You can be hostile, and I was conscious that was happening. And when you have children, if you're lucky, you become very conscious of the risks of that, the impact of that. So I started looking around for help. I accepted that I was hard to work with, sometimes enjoyable to work with, but hard, and I was hard to live with. I found someone who was a psychotherapist. So by this time I was uh, 48, I think, 47 or 48. I had had bereavement counseling when my mum died. She died unexpectedly, just as I was starting out in teaching. But that was just, a 6-week block, and it worked. It helped a lot. So I found this psychotherapist, and I just contacted her and said, "Do you think you could see me?" And I went again. It was I think a 6-week block, but the sessions were incredible. And what would happen is that I would arrive almost unable to speak, just seething. And her training, her approach um, was to use clean language. So nothing she said would lead you to a particular kind of conversation or any particular kind of response. She didn't probe. She didn't want to try and unpick things because that would have loaded the situation. She just kind of kept me safe, said very little, just made me understand that if it took, half an hour for me to begin to talk, that was fine. It was it was almost like meditation, except there was just enough of a prompt. And so much came out, and I will share the sort of the germ of it this evening because I think it's useful in a universal way. Um, I still go back to it, and in fact, I emailed her a couple of days ago and said, I still quote you, and she was delighted. Um, so I had those sessions. I came away from those sessions understanding that it was enormously useful, but understanding also that um, that it is a conversation in itself about you, and you can have the conversation with yourself. It can be in your head, but it's got to be constructive. It's got to be, what is it that I would really like to be different, um, and can I keep the state of mind where I will want it to be different? I won't go back to how I was. Can I keep that? I didn't have answers, but that was a kind of a discipline, and something inside me told me you need to keep that to stay well. And I have largely been able to keep to it. So I'm going to tell you two things that I learned from her. Um, Bearing in mind that each session was just me sort of um, pouring out anger and self-loathing, um, contempt for everyone, but mainly myself. Um, and she taught me to realize that I had a very narrow explanation of everything, a very narrow interpretation, unbelievably narrow. And I've realized, since working with so many autistic kids and so many autistic adults, we don't choose to be narrow. You don't know what you don't know. You can't see beyond the walls that you're used to. And where autistic people are successful in engaging with the world, um, it involves breaking out of the narrow framework that we're used to, and you know fiddling with it danger a little bit, exploring the unknown, however briefly. And the way that she put it was, it's wider than you think. And I can still remember her saying to me, she just leant forward, and it was time for me to go that evening, and she leant forward and she said, it's wider than you think. And I wrote it down when I got home, and it reminded me of a painting. And I'm going to just turn, Joe, am I okay to turn the laptop now and show everyone? So in the corner there of my room is a print. It's not an original, it would be worth millions. It's a print of a painting by Chagall. It's not the painting that I'm going to talk about, but I love Chagall. He's always with me every day. Chagall did a painting called Time is a River Without Banks. And when she said to me, it's wider than you think, I thought of the river and I imagined it without banks. And then I felt, yes, I am constrained by my very fixed attitude and interpretation of everything that happens. That was the first thing. And about 2 weeks later, I think it was our last session, she said to me, it's like a piece of wood. You've got to work with it. And she meant that, just as a piece of wood has a grain, and if you want to carve it or cut it, it's easier to work with the grain. It reminded me of my dad's shop My dad was a butcher and a fishmonger, and fish has a grain, meat has a grain. It's easier to cut it perfectly if you know what you're doing with the grain. So that stayed in my mind forever. Work with it. I had no problem with that at all. So those were the two things I took, and I still use them all the time. I said one of them to somebody last week, um, which they said was really clear and helpful. I'm always using them. But when I saw a psychotherapist, I was not diagnosed autistic, and she was not interested. She was not qualified in that area. We never talked about it. She never suggested you should see someone else. Not at all. She, I think, felt, and she's been proven right, actually, that psychotherapy was appropriate for me. Not because of autism, I'm sure, but because of the impact of 30 years of chronic illness. I had 27 ambulance admissions, stayed in for a week or 10 days every time, was in intensive care. When I was in intensive care, they were ready to switch off the machine. They called my wife in, they were ready to put a time at the bottom of the sheet. And then, thank goodness, I sort of flickered back into life. But when I came out of intensive care, the consultant said to me, "You cannot come to us in this condition again. You won't survive it." So all of that had impacted me in terms of um, in terms of my whole demeanor, my whole outlook, and of course in terms of the level of anxiety. But still knew nothing about an autistic identity for myself, even though I was mainly teaching autistic kids and loving it, and reading about autism every day. And then about 2 years after psychotherapy, it just occurred to me. I think something my wife said about the way that I answer questions or the way I ask questions. Um, yeah, I was very rigid, very demanding about, you must answer the question that I ask, not just the thing that interests you at the moment. And I realized there was that one more step to go. And I found a clinical psychologist, and she diagnosed me. Um, and so for the last 13, 14 years, I've had that information as well. Um, it didn't really change me. People always ask me, does it help? Would you recommend that I get an assessment? Um, it's just one more dimension. It sometimes answers concerns for me that psychotherapy didn't. It sometimes helps me to understand my family, and it helps them to understand me. What it has done is enabled me to not feel guilty about the things I really love, and to do them as much as I need to, and to really thrive on them. So things that I do for work, or things that I do for pleasure, I do them knowing why I'm good at them, why it suits me, why that is a very valid experience of the world, and exciting and pleasurable, and and it feeds into what I will eventually become, um, which is as yet unknown. But I feel all the time. Um, I have done since I came out of intensive care. I felt all the time that I am moving towards something close to what I was meant to be at the beginning. And there's a wonderful sense in that of repair, relating to my health issues. And the happier I am, the less anxious I am. Um, so all of that is positive. How did I break free? Oh my goodness. Okay, I need to tell this quickly. In the Senko role, Um, there was a moment of crisis. I had a team, a large team of support staff for which I was responsible. They were threatened with changes to their terms and conditions, pay, and I was threatened with not having as many of them. Um, and it went overnight from being a memo to being a life-changing event for me, literally overnight. And I don't know why, but unlike anything else, this switched me on to advocacy. It was advocacy for other people. My position was not under threat at all. They wanted me to manage the threat to other people who I felt were like my people. They were certainly my kind of people. And instantly the world turned upside down. I went home, I thought about it. Instantly I knew what I had to do, and not only what I had to do, but the order in which every step needed to happen. And it could not have been clearer. If you had given me a script like I gave to kids in my infant school, if you had given me the whole thing written down, it would not have been clearer than it was in my head. And I went to work the next day and I just went boom, 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 did all of the things that I knew had to happen on day one and laid the ground for the things that I knew would have to happen on day two and day three. And on day two, I filled the staff room with half of the staff, teaching staff, support staff, and set out what was the situation, what were the rights and wrongs of it, um, and what needed to happen next. They went away. I did the whole thing without notes. I just spoke to them with power that I never knew I had. Every point landed. And the next day, I did the same again with the other half of the staff, which included the leadership team. They just invited themselves to come and listen to what the hell is this guy doing, leading a industrial action. I think governors were there. Um, and that was day three. And on day four, I knew this was big because governors were coming in and out of the school. I was summoned, I was frog marched from one end of the site to the other to see the head by two assistant heads. And I was sat in her office and I realized that was the only part of the whole thing that I did not have a clear plan. And she took an A4 pad of paper off her desk and a pen and she passed it over to me and she said, write down what you want. So if you imagine that's the outcome after something that hadn't even existed 4 days before. And thank God I was able to be pragmatic and not be an idiot. And I wrote down 5 things that were appropriate, meaningful, proportionate to the situation, um, and just handed it back. She read them and she said, I will confirm by break time that you will have those. And I could not believe what I had done. Also, I could not believe what she had done. I can't share all of the circumstances, but what she did was equally as brave as what I did, even though it was in the privacy of her office. And I walked away from that knowing that my life had changed. And that was, if you like, that was, an explosion of advocacy. It was intended to be advocacy for others, and those others all but one gained something of it. Um, but it also became self-advocacy in the sense that from way down in my stomach came this fire. I can remember going home on day 2 before the first presentation in the staff room. Luckily, I lived close to the work. I was able to skip out the last lesson of the day, run home and change my shirt and get back to school, rehearsing in my head what I was going to say and do it. And I did the same again the next day. So, there was all of that within 48 hours, that I knew I would take with me for the rest of my life. Within a year, I had left, and of course, it was tearful and there was a lot of unease. I didn't find it comfortable going. I was angry with them, but new management had taken over. And the minute they found out what had happened, of course, that was the end of my time there. I kind of knew that would come. But there it was. And so I learned from that so many things, but one that I want to talk about is the difference between, and these things I think people often talk about as if they are almost the same, as if they are, you could, interchange these terms. You can't. And I think people often get the sequence of these wrong. The difference between mental states and emotions. They are not the same. One of the things that irritates me occasionally, um, actually very often, I'm afraid, about standard approaches to autism in schools is that over and over and over, I read in plans and reviews, about how the child needs to be able to label emotions. I could label emotions with 2 words and they're not pretty. I don't go in for this huge urgency about labeling emotions. What I would call emotion X, you would say it's emotion Y. It's something else. Oh no, that's not what that emotion looks like or sounds like. It's so subjective, and emotions work in autism so differently. Nothing gets my goat more than to see non-autistic staff in schools writing that the child needs to learn to label emotions. Well, maybe they already do. Maybe they label their emotions with movement or with actions. Maybe they label their emotion by choosing which book to pick up next because that one reflects their emotion to them. Maybe they reflect their emotion by choosing who to go and be with or to be on their own. I do not buy into this standard prescribed labeling of emotions. I think it's completely unhelpful. But mental states, crack on. Knowing what mental states are is incredibly helpful. If I had known when I was younger what my mental state was when this happened or when I did that, it would have been powerful. Mental states like doubting. I am doubting what this person says. That's not an emotion. I haven't got to an emotion yet. Once my doubt is confirmed, I will feel an emotion, believe me, but I have not got there yet. I'm just in the mental state of doubting and I want more information. Processing. We talk so much about processing now, and it is such a great breakthrough to find in schools. People are talking about processing. I need to process that. I need time to process. That's a mental state. It's not an emotion. Any emotion under the sun could be the result of my processing. Once I've done the processing, please leave me alone while I process. So, what could we do usefully? We could rip out every page in the textbooks about emotions, that they give to teachers. And I train teachers, mainstream early career teachers. I train them in autism. We could take out the pages about emotion and put in an awful lot of information about mental state. There isn't time today to go into that in detail, and it's not that kind of an event. But if there were one thing I would hope professionals would take away, professionals in education, That would be it. Prioritize mental state. Um, don't worry about emotion. It's not in your gift, believe me. Next, self-narrative. I learned this from somebody else because of um, all of the health issues, all of the absences from school, all of the crises that I went through in 30 years, because of the height that I was as a child, because my head was almost as big as the rest of my body when I was 4 or 5 years old, because my mum never took photos of me because she didn't want me to see that when I was older. Um, I learned from a friend that I have these self narratives, or I had. I'm happy to say I don't now. 10 years ago, I had them. And they were behind some of my worst impulses. They drove my desire for power in relationships and everything else. They made me neurotic. Self narratives, we have them, we grow up with them. They are worth challenging. And I'm so grateful to a friend who helped me to do that over years. I'm conscious at the time, and I'm coming to the end of the main points. Here is one from the same friend. Here's something that you can take away that does not relate to the educational context or profession. It's a wonderful phrase, and it's there for me. It's right up there with it's wider than you think, and you've got to work with it. And this is it: your good is your bad. And when that was first said to me by someone who cares, I had no idea what they meant. It sounded like a criticism, and I do react to criticism because I don't always understand it. Your good is your bad. What it meant, or what I took from it, was that the very things which allow you to be wonderful, to do wonderful things, allow me to like you so much, are also occasionally the very same things which snap back at me and hurt me. Recently, I was working with an adult who expressed huge thanks in an email um, after months and months of work. Huge thanks. And I said, "You're very welcome. Just remember, you haven't felt the sting yet." And they said, "What do you mean the sting? You don't have a sting. You've been marvelous to us." And I said, "That's because it just hasn't happened. You would know if you had felt the sting." And then I explained about your good is your bad. I don't know, but I suspect it applies to everyone to some degree. The things that are so acute in us, so accentuated, can also hurt people. So I try to be aware of that. Not always managing, but I try to be aware of that. Um, I've talked about how there has always been change and new information for me. It's come in these very bumpy stages. But a couple of weeks ago, I helped someone, an autistic woman that I've been working with for a year or so. I helped her to reframe something she felt very bad about. Felt she would never be able to escape from it. A memory, and a self narrative, a self perception. And I helped her to think about it in the terms that I was taught by the friend who said to me, "Your good is your bad." And the terms are these: you did that, you were like that, you're not like that now because you have new information. And I've quizzed that a lot. What exactly do you mean by new information? What counts as new information? And now I've stopped asking because now I know I can see it myself when it happens. Yes, I used to be like that, or I used to think that, or I used to feel that, I used to argue that. I don't have to deny that that was me then. I don't have to deny it. I don't have to feel bad about it because now I have new information. And knowing that now I have new information and I can live differently means I can also accept how I was. The things that I don't like about how I was are okay now because I didn't have all of this information then, and I can forgive myself. And I now teach that to other people when I feel the time is right. We draw like a little roadmap of their whole story, and I can draw the lines and say, right, well, that was then. Then what happened? You got new information and you told me about it last week. And we go on and life becomes stages. Somebody said to me, you know, the stage thing, that these are each different stages, and I'm not in that stage anymore. They said that's really helpful. And I know that the transformation I've seen in that person is unbelievable. And it's because they have put things into stages instead of believing that that's always going to be with them. And that's what you get when you use the concept of new information. Lastly, another gem. It's in the gallery of these great things that I live with. Um, After the bust up with school, when I was really torn up about it, about losing that part of my career, and not knowing what really I was supposed to be doing now, what kind of person I was going to be, but feeling able to make some decisions, and I did make a lot of big decisions in the crisis period, a lot of personal decisions. I made them; they were right, but I didn't know what was the objective, what was my destination. And somebody said to me, "It's okay. It's okay. Don't regret this. You've left. You just haven't arrived yet." And that was so relieving that I didn't have to worry about these huge decisions I had made, big changes in my life, didn't have to fret about it, didn't have to cry, because it was a conscious decision, a positive decision to leave something. And I just needed at some point to arrive. And I would know when I had arrived, when I had arrived. That's now how I see everything. That's why I talk about becoming the person I was meant to be. I'm not there, but I feel I'm getting much, much closer to it. I've left so many things, but I had to leave them to stand any chance of arriving at that other person, that the person underneath the masking. There you are, Joe.
Barney, that's amazing. Thank you so much. I've just been reflecting. I've known you, gosh, well, over 10 years, and I've learned so much about you tonight that I didn't know.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing such a personal story, one that is full of vulnerability. I'm sure I speak for everyone tonight when I say thank you so much for trusting us with sharing your story. Really appreciate it. Also, if the Wellbeing Hub ever gets t-shirts made, those your gallery is going to go on those t-shirts.
That would be wonderful. I think maybe have on the front you could have "You've left" and on the back, but I haven't arrived.
Amazing. Oh, we could be millionaires.
Yeah, it could catch on.
Okay, we have some questions for you, Barney. I have a million questions myself, but I'm very fortunate that I get to chat with you fairly often, so I'll save those. But lots of thanks coming through to you in the chat. I'm not sure if you have a chance to see those, but we have a question saying, thank you for the amazing talk. Just wondered how you deal with exhaustion from masking.
That's a really good question. Only recently I've been noting that I feel exhaustion in a different way than I did when I was teaching. When you're teaching, you have a structure. You know the times of day when you're going to feel hungry or tired or anxious or whatever. And I've lost all that. And my day is very unstructured. It's been very unstructured for 8 years. And I think that is one thing that's sort of catching up with me, so that I will hit the bed at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and think, God, have I got COVID? Why am I so exhausted that I can't move? But it only lasts an hour. And so I think it's nothing serious. It's that I'm processing. And usually it's because, oh, yesterday I was with people. I did this thing that I was asked to do. I did it. I'm happy about it. But gosh, that's hit me. And then also, oh yeah, I did a talk in the evening. So I know, like tomorrow, I have to go and see one of the people that I am travel training and interview training. And I'm looking forward to that. But I know actually, before I get there, I will really feel tired just because I've done this. And it's just about processing. And it's about the fact that doing this again puts a dent in a self narrative here or there, and I know I'm going to have to process that and adjust to it and think, well, am I happy with, what I said about myself? Was that true? All of it? That's going to be hard. So, what was the question again, Joe?
It was just about the
Yeah,
masking leading to exhaustion,
yeah.
because
Well,
what we know about masking is that it's incredibly effortful, or it
yeah,
can be incredibly effortful. Particularly, let's say in childhood, or for people who aren't able to take a nap in the day, or
yeah,
who have a much more structured environment where it's just not possible
yeah.
to recover in that way.
I went on a charity event on a boat on the Thames one evening a few months ago, and arrived not knowing anyone, and I had to mask a lot. And I got home and felt I'd done it badly. And when you do it badly, you feel such an idiot. Um, and yeah, I felt yuck after that. Um, but that doesn't happen too often. And a lot of the time now, I'm masking, but I tell myself, yeah, you're masking because it's the job you've chosen to do, and you enjoy doing it. And it leads you into adventures and new experiences all the time that you could never have planned. Um, it's the price you pay. But for sure, no doubt, masking is exhausting and sometimes quite sickening.
Thank you. And just some forewarning, our October speaker is Dr. Amy Pearson from Durham University, who's going to be talking to us about masking. So there'll be a connection to that later on in the year. Another question is, do you think the anxiety at weekends after teaching was fallout from the week, or related to aspects of the job outside the classroom where you had less control?
Oh, it's such a great question. Such a good question. I have never thought specifically about the first part of the question. Was the anxiety about the week just gone, or knowing that Monday is coming? A lot of my friends, probably your friends, Joe, who are teachers, say that they dread Sunday because they know what's going to happen. It happened to me every week for 20 years. You tell yourself, it's okay. I'll get it ready on Sunday. I'll do everything on Sunday. I'll plan it all out. I'll be ready for the week. And on Sunday, what do? I used to find myself feeling sick all day, unable to speak to anyone, unable to do any work, just beating myself up that the week was not going to be good enough, that things weren't going to be ready. And of course, they weren't ready because Sunday was just a nightmare of anxiety. But Saturday was bad as well. Was that because I was trying to recover from the week that had just finished and all of that peopling? It probably was, but I've not thought of it in that way until this question. Um, but yeah, I mean, it was Saturdays that prompted me to go to psychotherapy, because Saturdays were the day when I could have played with the children or whatever, done things, we'll get a family day out. and didn't have the excuse, oh, it's Sunday, there's school tomorrow. Saturday was the day with no real excuse. The decent thing would have been, to be with the family and enjoy it. But I couldn't enjoy it. And that really pushed me in the end to go to psychotherapy, that I was so unpleasant on Saturday. Was that a result of needing to decompress and not knowing that I needed to, because that was before I was diagnosed? Possibly. Great question.
Thank you, Barney. Another question is, thank you for your honest reflections and insights. How do you self-advocate when you don't know where to start or who can help to advocate for you? And can advocating only come with self-confidence and awareness? So two sections to that. So
yeah, let's do them one
how do you
at
know
a
where
time.
to start? Yeah, first one is
Um,
how do you know how do you self-advocate when you don't know where to start or who can help you to
yeah,
advocate for yourself?
yeah. So when did I start self-advocacy? I was 6. Um, and I just did the daftest, oddest thing imaginable because it fascinated me. And if your fascination is, I don't know, painting shells, or making bits for radios, I don't know, whatever fascinates you is the only thing that will give you enough energy, desire to self-advocate. Um, when I went to uni and told them I didn't want to do drama, I just wanted to read books, um, it was fear. I was frightened they were going to make me do the drama, and I had lost the self-confidence to get up on stage completely. That having been my favorite thing for a decade. So sometimes it's fear that pushes you, fear of consequences. I'll tell you very, very quickly one episode. Um, in my, gosh, I don't know when, in my 40s, I was doing my postgrad, my second postgrad qualification. And no, I was starting my master's, and my dad fell ill with cancer, and I was driving up and down the M4 all the time. I couldn't keep up the studies. I had short loan books. You'll know all about this, Joe. I had short loan books on my shelf, and I realized, they were weeks old. Now it's months old, and it just became absolutely terrifying. And I knew that I had to do something about it, because by my calculation, the fine was running into hundreds. I went to the uni. I went to the library. And I think I took with them, I can't remember, but I took either a letter from my dad's hospital, or, goodness, it might have been his death certificate or something. I can't remember. I took one piece of paper, and I thought, if necessary, that's going to have to do the job for me. And of course, I broke down in tears in the entrance area of the library. Straight away, a lovely librarian took me into an office. This had probably happened lots and lots of times for her. Gave me a box of tissues and told me to take my time. And I think she read the name off the piece of paper, looked me up, and of course, straight away knew roughly what the issue was. I was barely able to speak in all the time that I sat there. I got a few words out. She said, "It's okay. It's okay." Now, fast forward, I took a woman recently, an autistic woman, to defend herself in an appeal about a penalty charge notice that she had refused to pay because she felt it was wrong. And we went together. I had helped her submit all of the arguments. We went into the appeal room. There was an adjudicator there, lovely woman. And my friend was so anxious about what this was going to cost, and also how this was going to damage her self-confidence in the future to advocate for herself. If she had put herself through this process for 6 months, it had made her ill, and she was now told, "You're a very bad person. You must pay this, and we're going to keep a record of it." That didn't happen, because the adjudicator said, just like the woman in the library said to me, she looked down at her file, then she looked at us, and she said, "Well, I'm very happy to tell you, you're not going to pay anything." And then she explained why. And it was because the council that had sent her the penalty charge notice had not sent enough evidence to the tribunal. They hadn't met the minimum standard of evidence. And she said, I don't even need to read your case or to hear anything from you to tell you that you are not going to pay anything. I quash this fine. But she said, I can tell you, because I have read it, your submission was outstanding. And in the letter that she wrote afterwards, which went to the council, of course, she mentioned that they hadn't submitted enough evidence and the fine would not stand. But she also said that she had heard in detail the case from my friend, which wasn't actually true. My friend never spoke except to say hello and thank you. She had read my friend's submission, but she didn't put my friend through an oral presentation. And I thought, this woman has kind of piled one kindness upon another to make my friend feel good. And what I would say in answer to the question you gave me is, sometimes it's fear and crisis. Some of the best things I have done have come out of fear and crisis. And you just have to believe that somewhere on the other side of a desk, at the end of the corridor, there is someone with kindness. Because there are always people who recognize what you're going through. They just wanted you to give them the chance to be kind to you. Now, the second part of your question, what was that?
Barney, the second part was advocating only come with self-confidence and awareness.
To a degree, that's true. To a degree, it's not, in my experience. Yes, some of the things I've done had self-confidence. But some of the things I've done that I'm very proud of, I was at rock bottom. It's probably about 50-50. And where I was at rock bottom, something desperate in me said, you have to survive this. And perhaps it was my experience in intensive care. When they told me how ill I had been, perhaps that's made me buck my ideas up, and perhaps we all need a scare sometimes to get the best out of us. But it is true, I've got to be realistic and say there are times when I've been able to advocate because I had the right kind of self-confidence or cheekiness to do it at that moment. But I know people, I've seen people advocate for themselves without that kind of cockiness. And actually, I'm going to mention, because it's out there publicly as a celebration, and because I've mentioned it in 2 books already, Joe, you know the story. Ellie Chappell, I'm sure, would not mind me mentioning it again. The story of Ellie Chappell and her daughter's quest for learning, a story known as The Shoeness of a Shoe. It's appeared on the Special Needs Jungle website. It's in a chapter of a book that I contributed to, a book on research and special needs. And it's in another that I contributed to on special needs and curriculum. The Shoeness of a Shoe. Ellie's daughter, who is non-verbal and largely non-verbal, and has learning disability, wanted to explore the quality of the shoes arranged by the front door of their house, and just went for it herself. She designed the task herself. She picked the shoes up one at a time, felt them, examined them closely, held them to her face, smelled them. She is, I should say, she is blind and deaf. She taught herself the quality of each shoe. And it's a wonderful story. Find it on the Special Needs Jungle website, or go on YouTube and search Ellie Chapel TED Talk and enjoy the story from Ellie herself. It's brilliant. Now, why am I mentioning that? Ella is not cocksure, self-confident, filled with, a life of successful interactions with the world. Far from it. But she has a spirit inside her that she trusts, and she wanted to advocate for herself through shoes. And by golly, she did it. If you watch the TED Talk, it'll tell you more than I can about how to advocate for yourself when you are lacking confidence.
Thank you, Barney. I've just put a link to Ellie's talk in the
Oh,
chat.
well done. Yeah, it's great.
Question here is, it often feels much easier to advocate for others. How did you move from advocating for others to advocating for yourself?
Well, that's a good question, but I don't know when I started advocating for others, except to say that I think it began in my teens, my late teens. I had a girlfriend who worked with me for my dad, and something happened in her family, and I instantly knew your job now is to make her feel better in a circumstance where that would be difficult. And I only know from the fact, from how she behaved towards me later, that I did okay on that task. And then the fact that my first teaching job came because a poor man who I had known passed away alone in his flat. Taught me something. And then ever after, I've felt there are times when you can speak for somebody else and it's okay to do that. But even better, you can equip them to do it. And then in the last few years, I said to you, the friend who gave me these phrases and the psychotherapist who, bless her, I'm still in touch with, who gave me two of those phrases. They equipped me to advocate for myself on a scale, a dimension that I would never have imagined. That's that to have those insights and to have people so kind as to say, look, here you are, here's actually what you can use about yourself, have it with my blessing, off you go, have a great life. That's an amazing experience.
Thank you, Barney. I've got a question of my own that I'd like to ask, that I ask all of our speakers every month. But before I do, can you just very briefly, because we're running out of time, but could you just very briefly answer the question of your school play that you wrote in primary school? What was it about?
Oh gosh, it's so embarrassing, but I was only 6. My dad had grown up during the war, and he enjoyed war films. I wrote what was basically a 15-minute copy of a famous war film. And suffice to say, all the kids in my class had to sit on the stage and roll from left to right in this plane that was under attack. And I can't believe at 6 I was teaching people to do this, and they had to do it together, and then they had to shout like they were on a radio. Yeah, sticks. Well, I can tell you, yeah, I was no Anthony Sher.
Amazing, thank you. So I ask all of our speakers this same question before we wrap up, and that is, of all the amazing things that you've talked about tonight and all the wisdom that you shared with us, if there was just one thing that you'd like us to go away with from your talk this evening, what would that be?
Your good is your bad. And I'll tell you why that one. All of the others were equally helpful, but that one is a caution. If you want to keep enjoying life and experiencing happiness and gaining new information, getting rid of the old self narratives, finding your destination and loving people, watch out for the bad. Because if it comes from the same wellspring as the good, you won't always catch yourself doing it until it's too late. Your good is your bad is a caution for everyone.
Thank you so much, Barney. I'm incredibly grateful to you for your time tonight, particularly since you've described how it will impact on tomorrow and potentially your weekend as well. So thank you so much for sharing your limited energy with us. We really appreciate it. Couple of things. You've talked tonight a lot about thriving and flourishing and a joyful life, and I just want to offer somebody who's here tonight. She was a previous speaker for us, Sarah Jane Critchley. She has Sarah Jane, you have a webinar about autistic joy that's coming up. I know you emailed me recently. I wondered if you could just share that in the chat, because I think that would be a really nice thing to follow up Barney's talk with, if any of you out there are able to attend. So Sarah Jane, please do share details of that if you can. And I'm probably abusing my host's privilege here, but just the invitation that if you are eligible and you haven't done so already, please vote. I'm going to put a link in the chat to the Electoral Commission, which gives you all the information about how to do so if you're not sure. Thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate you all being here tonight. And thank you so much, Barney.
Pleasure.
See you again in September for Brian's talk. Take care, everyone.
Bye.